Well, today we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Jason Kolb, an emergency medicine physician and associate professor of emergency medicine at Northeast Ohio Medical University. Now, Dr. Kolb's life took an unexpected turn after a devastating skiing accident left him paralyzed. And despite the immense challenges, Dr. Kolb has found unwavering strength in his faith, which has shaped his perspective on suffering, resilience, and purpose. And
Mm.
he's sharing his powerful journey in his book. It's Down the Mountain Skiing, Suffering, Insufficient Grace, offering insight into how faith can be a firm foundation in life's hardest moments. And his story is not just about tragedy, it's about hope, community, and finding joy even in adversity. And we just can't wait to hear his wisdom today and encouragement. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Sarah and Len. It's a real honor to be here.
Dr. Kolb, so many people that are listening and watching have questions about why do things happen and where do you find faith in the midst of those challenges and how does that tie into the field of medicine? And we're going to go there in our conversation today. But before we do, just to familiarize our listeners with your story, tell us about the event that happened that changed your life, about the
Yeah.
accident that happened.
Well, I was skiing in Colorado at Copper Mountain. This was an annual trip I took with a group of guys from church, and even our former pastor would go. And so it was kind of a combination of a men's retreat and a Bible study and a long weekend ski getaway because we all love to ski. So I've been doing that annually with these guys for about 10 years, and it was the final day of that trip. It was January 29th. 2023 on a Sunday morning when I made a wrong turn at high speed and crashed over a 20-foot drop that went down to the tubing hill. Um, so that's kind of the short story of what happened that day.
Mm, mm. And
I
you
mean, I
knew at that moment in time that you had experienced something traumatic or
Yeah, it was really strange because I remember cresting this hill, seeing the drop, and having about a millisecond to think, what am I going to do to not crash into all these kids and families that were on the tubing hill and coming up the magic carpet? So the last thing I remember is planting my skis as hard as I could to try to stop. And from there, I got knocked unconscious and I tumbled probably another 25 yards and my friend skied around the proper way to get to me and said I was unconscious for a couple of minutes. And as I emerged from that concussion, it's hard to explain if you haven't had one, but I felt like I was in a dream and I was hearing voices of people around me and I knew something really bad had happened, but I didn't know what, and I didn't even know who it had happened to. My first thought was somebody else has had a terrible accident, and then my friend John was at my side, and I remember him saying, Jason, you're okay. You're okay. But then the first thing he asked me that I remember is, do your legs hurt? Because my legs were at a very awkward angle to my body, and he thought I might have broken my hips or broken my legs. And so, kind of in the fog of my concussion, I reached down and I touched my right thigh, and I couldn't feel it. And so now it's dawning on me that this thing has happened to me, that something bad has happened to me. And I took my gloves off and I remember saying slash praying, thank God I can use my hands, whatever this is. And I unzipped my coats and I felt down my chest wall, down to my abdomen, and I got to my belly button and I lost sensation. And I checked it a couple times, John said. And then I said, John, this is bad. I'm a T10 paraplegic and I'll never walk again, but God's grace will be sufficient for me. And in that moment, there were like multiple graces that God gave me. I mean, one is kind of funny. I was right. It was T10 at the level of the belly button. Somehow in my fog, I remembered back to medical school, and that's one of the landmarks, right at T10, right at my belly button. So, um, yes, Len, I knew on the mountain that I was paralyzed. And I also feel that God just revealed to me in that moment that this was permanent. And I just accepted it right there, which sounds strange even to recount that. Some spinal cord injury patients have partial spinal cord injuries or incomplete. So they may heal partially or fully. I saw it when I was in rehab. I saw a woman come in quadriplegic and walk out without a cane 6 weeks later. And I celebrated that with her. But my injury is permanent, and barring a miracle from God, I won't walk again. But then the second grace right there in the mountain was he gave me his word. Like, just as he promises that he will do, and I can testify that it's true that his word that over many years I'd hidden in my heart, he brought to my mind in that moment. Jason, my grace is sufficient for you. And I'll tell you, I could not quote chapter or verse at the time. I can now, but I was going to need a lot of grace in those next few hours and days and weeks. And so that's what it was like lying on that hard packed, cold snow on my back on the mountain, at the bottom of the mountain. I was almost to the lift. I almost made it.
Wow.
Wow, your grace is sufficient for me.
Mm,
That is so beautiful. When you said that, I just kind of got chills listening to it.
mm.
It's amazing to have that attitude and perspective. How did that perspective help you navigate the physical and emotional changes as you were navigating going
Yeah,
through physical therapy?
that's a good question, Sarah. One thing I did is I allowed myself the grace to mourn and to cry, which I did that first few weeks or first month. I cried most every day in the morning, sometimes for just a couple minutes, sometimes longer. So, God allowed me to give myself grace and to kind of go through this process of shock and disorientation. Like, my life just changed in this moment. I won't walk again. I've lost my career. I can't play golf. How's my daughter going to get down the aisle someday on that day? So all these questions, yeah, I gave myself grace to kind of mourn through those. Um, as far as his grace, there were so many things that were true that we experienced. I mean, my wife Amy and I, the Bible talks about the two becoming one flesh, and so, I mean, this was an injury to us, and it affected her as much as it affected me. Um, but as we wrestled through the curses of this injury, grace also showed us the blessings. Um, God says that He is close to the brokenhearted. And Psalm 23 famously says that He will walk with us in the valley of the shadow of death. And I don't know that I was in the shadow of death, but I was in the valley. And just to experience that intimacy and that closeness with God is hard to articulate. But it's not something that I think we typically feel when we're on the mountaintop and life is great
Mm-hmm.
and family's good and promotions at work and bank account has a lot of zeros and all those things. So there was lots of blessings and lots of grace those first few months and even now, 2 years later.
Wow. I'm glad you shared all that. I think a lot of people need to hear what you just said. So I'm glad that you had the opportunity to share that. I know
Yeah.
in a way you've likened the suffering and the challenges that you've gone through to the life of Jesus and his pain and
Mm.
suffering. How do you kind of connect those dots and what does that mean to you?
Well, I'll tell you, I share this sometimes, and I think I put it in the book. But when I was on my back on the mountain, as I just described, I started to have tremendous pain. I broke almost all my ribs on the right side, about half of them in two places, my sternum, other injuries. I had tremendous pain, and I thought, I'm not the first one to have suffered. My brother had been through something, my dad had been through something, and I thought, Jesus has been through some. He knows suffering. He knows physical suffering, and so not my will, but thine be done. And those have gone before me, and now it's my turn. Um, when I look at the life of Jesus, it's the ultimate answer of why do bad things happen? Why is there evil? And why is there suffering? And Christianity, I think, gives the richest and the most nuanced understanding of suffering and evil, but it's still not wrapped up in a neat little box with a bow on top. But here's what we do know, and that God Himself took on flesh and suffered right alongside of us. And so we cling to that God who wept over the death of His friend and who cried out to God, "Why have you forsaken me?" And so we know that we can weep And we know that we can bring our chaos and our confusion and even our anger to God because our God did that, that Jesus did that. So that's the ultimate answer to suffering. Um, I rested too in the fact that God is God and I am not. And I would look out the window and I would see the Rocky Mountains from my hospital room in the rehab hospital. And I would just remind myself, like, if God did that, if He made those mountains, He's got me. I don't have the burden of running the universe. I don't even have the burden of having to understand why this happened to me. But we know that there's not a bird that falls out of its nest without the Father knowing it. He knew when I fell off the mountain. And I just have to rest in that, even though it's incomplete. I don't have a full answer to that why.
Mm.
And I've heard you say in another podcast or when I've heard you speak that God ordained you for this, or you
Yeah,
believe you were picked this for, not that you would have picked this maybe, but
right.
but a purpose. How has your understanding of purpose evolved since the accident?
Well, this accident happened when I was 49 and I had worked clinical emergency medicine for 20 or 25 years. And with this accident now, I cannot do emergency medicine. So I have a different platform now. I have a different purpose. And I'll tell you, it's really life-giving to me. It's very energizing to be able to do a podcast like this. Or this morning, I was invited to Talmadge Middle School FCA with about 30 middle schoolers, got to share the gospel. And so I see purpose in the pain. And I want to be careful. That can be a cliche too. Like there's purpose in the pain. Well, I want to be sympathetic to the parent whose kid has leukemia or to the woman who's just gone through divorce. I mean, like the suffering part is real, and sometimes it's hard to find the purpose. And um, so I do want to tread really, really lightly there. But I do feel that this accident was such an accident. It was so bizarre. I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I'm not a reckless skier. I'm actually, and I wasn't then. I wasn't out of control. I wasn't impaired. It wasn't well marked. I made a wrong turn. It just doesn't make any sense. I can't make any sense out of this other than to view it through the lens that God ordained it. I mean, somewhere in the intersection of His sovereignty over everything and my free will, they intersected, and I made this turn that caused this accident that, it changed my second half to give me this platform. And so, yeah, I'll tell you, it's actually a lot of fun. Other than not being able to walk,
Yeah.
life is really good.
No, that's wonderful, and those are questions that everybody wrestles with to various
Yeah.
degrees. He just really come into great focus when something like this happens,
Right.
and so glad you're getting the opportunity to share about that because it's speaking to a lot of people. One
Yeah.
thing you might be able to speak to in a unique way is the role of other people when something like
Mm.
this happens.
Mm.
What's the best way we can come along someone who's gone through a tragedy in their life and provide the most support? And did you see that?
Oh man, completely. That's one of the great joys of the injury, along with the curses, was just being embraced by the community. I mean, this has been my hometown for my whole life, so we have a big community, a big church community, a big school community, neighborhood community, and so they surrounded us those first few months, especially when we needed it the most. I mean, they raised a lot of money. Being paralyzed is a very expensive injury. And so I'm so grateful for people that raise money for an adapted van that I can drive, to refurbish the home that I can function in. But not only that, they brought us meals for months. They built shelves in the basement. They did our landscaping. They prayed for us. They gave us space. So it's a good tricky question, Len. Like when someone is suffering, maybe just ask them
Mm,
like what they need. They probably need physical needs met. They may need financial needs met. They may need a ride to the doctor. They may need space, or they may need someone just to come sit with them. Like I would say I did not need that, but when you read the book of Job, when his friends first come to him The narrator tells us that they tore their robes and they sat with him for 7 days and nobody spoke a word. And
Hmm,
some
that's
people may need
fantastic.
that.
Mm,
They may just need the presence of community without a. I, I would caution listeners, and I've made this mistake too. You might say like a platitude or like, God works all things together for good, and so
mhm.
being estranged from your prodigal child is a good. Well, we just want to be careful there with our timing of our words, even though it's God's word. We want to be timing. So, yeah, community is so critical. If you are suffering, you've got to be in community because suffering alone is pain multiplied.
Mm.
Suffering in community is pain divided into smaller and smaller pieces. And then my last challenge to that question would be if you're not suffering, find that person in your community, in your church, in your school who is, and come alongside them and be that person that they need.
That is beautiful. What has been the biggest lesson that you think God has taught you through all of this? And for anyone who is listening right now, maybe struggling in their own season of suffering, what encouragement would you offer them today?
Yeah, I, I would say those of us who follow Christ, we know that He calls us to live in an upside down kingdom where blessed are the poor, blessed are the persecuted, where the greatest among you is the lowest servant of all, where the way that you find your life is to lose it, to give it away in service, to die to your selfish desires. And so most of us that are Christians know that. But my perspective changed when I was lying on my back, the bottom of that hill on January 29th. And all of a sudden, God's kingdom came into crystal clear focus. And I wish it was something that everybody could experience without tragedy. But it's so hard when life is good and everything, and you're just thriving and almost on autopilot. And so, in this strange way, it's even God's grace when He brings suffering into our lives to show us that this life is temporary. This body of ours is going to break down, every single one of us. And mine broke down sooner than I hoped it would, but it's a constant reminder to me. And in God's kingdom, blessed, the first shall be last, and everything's upside down. And so, actually, if you look at the cover of the book, Down the Mountain, it's not readily obvious what we did on the cover, but that's your hint, the upside down kingdom. And so, I would say that's the greatest lesson that I've experienced that probably we all know, but there's a special way I think that God shows us that in the midst of our suffering.
No, it's beautiful because we all need that word at one time in our life. It's the only way really we can face doubt and disappointment is to have
Right.
that perspective. So the book is
Yeah.
Down the Mountain, Skiing Suffering and Sufficient Grace. I know there's going to be a lot of people that want to keep up with you, connect
Yeah.
with you. What's all the ways you're getting the message out there?
I have social media accounts on Facebook and Instagram. It's Dr. Jason Kolb, Dr. Jason Kolb. I think it's pretty easy to find. We have a simple website too. I'll mention this. I thought this was a cool idea that we came up with. The book doesn't have pictures in it. It's really expensive to print them and then to sell color photos in a book. So we put tons of extra pictures on the website, chapter by chapter. So you can go there and check it out. That's also Dr. Jason Kolb .com. You can contact me or email me. There's a link there to do that. You can message me on social media. I mean, I'm a little older. I don't post a ton, but I do keep up, and folks can follow me that way if they'd like to.
Well, great. And we'll put all your information in the show notes as well. It was just so encouraging to sit and talk with you today. And
Yeah.
we're thankful for you and your story that you're sharing.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Len. It was a pleasure and an honor to be on the show.